Love is our creed. We honor all paths to the holy. We are most pleased and we welcome you to this discussion and lecture this afternoon. This is a series that we began in the summertime, and the series is entitled, Can We Talk Even If We Disagree? On June the 1st, we had our first of this series, Tom Baker IV and Dr. Joseph Winnicott Leiden, Confronting Extremism and Strengthening Democracy. The next event after this afternoon will be a discussion, and it's sort of Can We Talk? And we have two, they're not guests here, Jesse and Classis Waters will be discussing the issues of civil rights, black and white conversations. It'll be in the fellowship hall, and it'll be a very, very honest discussion of how we feel. And so we're putting everything at the front door and just trying to take our real selves in. So that'll be on October the 19th at 4 p.m. In January, we're going to be showing a movie entitled Purple, not the color purple, but Purple. And it is a film that is done by Resetting the Table. And this is an organization that tries to look at differences and make our discussions above our differences so that we can understand that there are bridges there beyond how we disagree with each other. And then in the spring and April, you'll get more information about that. We'll have two different workshops from Resetting the Table. And we'll actually have 40 people in each workshop, and you're invited to come, that we will learn how to talk to each other in a civil and empathetic and understanding way. So keep your eyes out for those, if you will. And I think most of you have a little flyer about the next two events. So we're honored today to have Dr. Claire Crawford to be with us. She is assistant professor in the Department of Politics and International Affairs and Program of African American Studies at Wake Forest University. I guess I could say the Wake Forest University. That's okay, Bland. Her research focuses on expanding our understanding of democratic engagement and futures through the study of power and freedom in political lives of black folks. Dr. Crawford has degrees, a BA in International Affairs and African American Studies, Conflict Management, both from Georgetown University. Her PhD in Political Science, International Relations from the University of Southern California. Her areas of expertise are black political thought, sound in politics, social movements, quotidian politics, and political identity formation. Let us welcome Dr. Claire Crawford.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad to be here with you all for today. And so in this, we will hear a lot of sounds, and we will also move through, as David also mentioned, like my research goes democratic theory, but then also like sound, so we'll blend those together. And particularly, it's really beautiful to be in a space where we do have pews. And so you'll also hear me tell a little bit of stories from parts of the movement. Particularly, I focus on the Albany movement that happened in Albany, Georgia, from 1961 and 1963. That's where my family is from, and that's where I spent a lot of time in the summers. And so if you'll listen with me here to this first story. Charles Sherrod likes to tell a story about holding a freedom meeting in a rural church near Albany. The sheriff and his deputies suddenly crashed into the church, and the people were struck with fear. The sheriff strutted around the church and made his point clear. We don't want to hear no more about registering in this county. But while he was speaking, the congregation began to hum "We'll Never Turn Back" softly. As the sheriff moved to the rear of the church and shouted, "There won't be no more freedom riders around here," the congregation commenced to sing, still softly. Then the singing became stronger and louder, and some sister began to moan till you could hardly hear the sheriff over the singing and moaning. the sheriff didn't know what to do. He seemed to be afraid to tell the people to shut up. Finally, he and his men just turned their backs and stomped out. Those beautiful people sang the sheriff right out their church. That was some powerful singing. And that is remembered by Andrew Young in that way. But what I want us to think about is, it began with a quotidian hum, this everyday thing, quotidian. And it rang as power, their freedom impulse, a people assembled for change despite the danger of the social political environment that hopes to render them silent even in their haven. It was a hum, an everyday refusal that cast out the visible, intimidating, and intimidated oppressor, in this case, the police officer. Nevertheless, they commenced to sing, an act of song creeping into the air as the congregation breathed life into what they thought would be continued into their raising of their voices, charged by their fearless spirits. They were present, and their power sensed as the sound overcame the policemen who left without confrontation. A song drawn from their realities, their strength to endure, their Black experiences, they sing to survive, a hum to exist. This passage often for me points to the many spectacular acts of power and collectivity where macro, sort of the bigger state interactions of political acts happen, but also the micro wrestle in this one space. There is the visible act of power, the micro being the church beginning to sing for the sake of freedom. As a meditation of survival, the idea of the hum ruminates from the past, present, and future. It reverberates. It's a deliberative move of invitation to engage your full being to produce a vibration. So if you don't mind engaging me for a second, because we are on wooden pews, and you just hum for a second and feel the pew vibrate with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And imagine that sound filling a room, enough for people who would exit because they could feel it coming off of these pews. And so on these pews, this multi-layered, contradictory fight takes place of the individual spirit, the social movement, and the praxis of what it means to be free. That hum is a deliberate embodiment of knowing that you want to survive, filled with the promise of the future. In that church, song arose from that hum, a recognition of togetherness, possibility, and what we will call otherwise existence. It was both above and in between the recognition of togetherness, possibility. They understood what was happening, the officers, but not really what was going on in the moment. They understood that going into that church would disrupt a possibility of freedom, that macro political outcome. Maybe they could prevent a protest. Maybe they could stop them from marching to the streets right afterwards. But they were unsure what else was happening. The freedom meeting, often called the mass meeting, was always the first step of organizing the community for actions such as boycotts. And it would always happen in a sacred place, the church. The officers were also moved by their presence, overpowered by the sounding of the people. Scholars have read this moment correctly as a deeply social, moving reflection of what it means to sing and the power of song. However, here, the people, a political collective, begin in non-speech, moaning, humming, shouts, nonsense lyrics, as some have noted. However, for the officers, that sound was enough to make sense that they were not wanted, that their presence was not life-affirming to all who were present. It is in fact in this moment that I'll call upon another scholar, Robin D.G. Kelly, and he asserts in the beginning of his book, Freedom Dreams, that once we strip radical social movements down to their bare essence and understand the collective desires of people in motion, freedom and love lay at the heart of the matter. There are political implications of love that are important to our emancipatory traditions that we can also hear in sound. Building on that possibility of love, we also I will define quickly here the otherwise. The otherwise comes from another scholar, Ashawn Crawley, and in his book, Black Pentecostal Breath, he says the otherwise, there are possibilities existing alongside that which we cannot always detect with our finite sensual capacities. So essentially, if we think about otherwiseness, one of the main ways I like to explain it is we understand an entrance through a door is the way to go in. However, if you gave somebody the mission to enter a room and they were to come through the window, did they not enter the room? And that is something of the otherwise. And so thinking about what else can happen in this moment alongside what you know. And so sometimes the failure of social movement scholarship is to grapple with love, which is then rooted in spirituality. A lot of my work draws from a question from Bernice Johnson Reagan, one of the co-founders of Sweet Honey in the Rock, who passed last year. And she asked this question, particularly as she comes out of the Albany movement as well. How can you know the political, social, and economic range of a community if you don't know how they signature their identity with their soundings? And by that, she means the depth of their sound. It's not just evidence of something culturally going on, but reflective of a community who understands what it means to be free together, and at times this idea of an infra-political reality. And by infra-political, what I mean is those things that are political engagements that we don't always point to as politics, right? As in like infrared light. And so here on a pew, people birth love and liberation in a sanctuary, a conjuring of love. Richard Aiton, another Black political theorist, he points out in his book, In Search of the Black Fantastic, that love itself, the subversive gift, is an important public good, and loving is a significant public act, particularly among those stigmatized and marked unworthy as love and incapable of deep commitment. Love brought what appeared to be a disjointed group of rural communities together in the civil rights movement. In a similar space, the church, not an enormous space often, but a sacred communal space, all found a reason to come and be present for a moment. The church becomes one of movement, the intermingling of language and being where the spiritual, secular, and political all dwell. On those pews, people decided to become political beings. From those pews, a hum fills a being, a felt sound that then fills and also fills another being on that pew. A moment where the building moves at the people's sounds, a moment where all had tears demonstrating love and the power of singing. They sang, hummed, and imagined on those wooden pews. Here, humming is an act of the interior. The interior is expansive, it's creative, it's impulsive, it can be dangerous. It's not always subject to your control, but instead expands. The interior leaves room to discuss sound also in the streets, the churches, and the buses as publicly expressed, but meant clearly for those who also understood why they were humming together. Thinking of sound as a site of improvisation, it also can be used to inform and de-inform structures. And also, we all have audible political conscioushoods that can be enacted through our sound. Today, I'm here to gather with you as a scholar of Black political theory, a child of the South, as my roots go into Southwest Georgia, and most importantly, a child of God. I'm grateful for the warm welcome I have received, and I'm looking forward to being a part of your community. Now, if you will join me for a moment in reflection and considering what freedom feels like. Here, as you know, the title of this talk will be Lessons from the Pew, and we'll go through several different values that I find important with sound along with it. And so think about this question, what freedom feels like, as I play Freedom in the Air from Bernice Johnson Reagan. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. There must be somewhere. And so as we consider this song, Freedom in the Air, it might be something you would have heard before. It's actually one of the few songs that actually comes out of the Albany movement. Bernice Johnson Reagan at the time was a student of Albany State College, and she began her first march in that November of 1961. She says they marched silently across Albany State College campus, crossing the Flint River Bridge, and our friend Annette called out, "Bernice, look back." Upon turning around, Bernice saw the support of the Albany State College student body, almost 300 students walking 2 by 2. They marched to the courthouse and proceeded back to the college. Due to the ongoing dismissal of Albany state administrators that a movement was necessary, they instead proceeded to Union Baptist close by. This would be Bernice's first mass meeting, when she was asked to sing, as she describes, her living changed a song, an act of her interior expanding, providing clarity and raising the group in song. They sang, "Over my head, I see freedom in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I see glory in the air. Over my head, I see music in the air." Reagan's word changed from trouble to freedom, because as it would be sung by the hymn, "Over my head, I see trouble in the air," is critical in understanding, one, the category of freedom songs, but two, the idea of your living literally wanting to get free. However, what strikes me most of the times is that her sight was triggered directly. Freedom being this elusive thing that you might not be able to feel, so that question of like, what does freedom feel like, might be in a little bit of elusive grab for me to ask you all. Because what does freedom feel like? And what does it mean to see freedom in the air? She says that as clearly as she sung the words, she looked up and the songs with clear direction of how one's body should move. Rising of one's head high, eyes closed, to imagine that freedom in the air. Their bodies leaning into the otherwise, exemplifying that singing is about feeling and the letting of go, and there are new modes of existence coming into being. And she would sing this song for decades. "Over my head, I see freedom in the air." What does it mean for freedom to feel like in this era of everything that we know is happening? What are we willing to do to get free? The young people of the movement found freedom through their voices when they often discovered it in jail. Many folks found their voices in jail, and in jail they also found courage. Before the movement, many would not have challenged the status quo of powers and the money of these local rural towns. For instance, Bernice said, "In jail, I practiced a kind of singing that was struck with me. It is the kind of singing where the song and singing are used to say who you are and what you think, and to confront and be an instrument for getting through the world. It was not a kind of singing that had profession written on it. It was a kind of singing that I had done in a different level of singing than I had done in glee clubs and choruses of my life. It was more related to the singing of the elders in the church, but different because it was me. And now I knew what I was singing about and how it carried me through. Without a lot of conscious work, I was beginning to become a singing fighter." And so she says jail was a voice lesson. And what does that teach us about courage? One of the very well-known songs as well from the movement that really talks to us about courage is "I Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around."
Ain't nobody gonna turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody gonna turn me round. Keep on walking, gonna keep on talking, gonna marching up to freedom. Ain't gonna let segregation, Lord, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let segregation, Lord, turn me round.
And there in jails, many talked of what that moment felt like. They would describe, as one editor of a magazine said, "My cell is the size of a railway carriage with a two-tiered bunk on either side. On the wall between the bunks is a water tap and basin next to it. Touching the mattress of the lower WC, the front of the cell is iron bars, rather less than the width of this paper apart. Says 5 inches with the ditto door, the rest is a metal sheet. The cell is crawling with cockroaches, the covers of the 4 mattresses stained with deposits and place reeks of compounds of urine. Worst deprivation of all is the complete absence of daylight, for the cell is lit by a bulb in the corridor outside, which throws in oblique shadows of the bars across this page as I write. Often the use of a cell for political activists is to silence the voice of dissenters or opposers to state-run institutions. Silence often rendering to one that they do not possess a voice or have a sense of meaning. The jail cell was this all-encompassing silencing tool. The literal disappearance of people from the streets into behind these cell doors often meant that they thought, at least, that the movement would end there. However, there are many records and recordings of folks saying that eventually many of these officers would kick them out of jail because they would sing all night, all morning. They would refuse to eat. And their voices would raise and continue to raise over and over again. And so eventually in Albany, Georgia, of all places, they described it, as Charles Sherrod talked to some kids, that it was just a Sunday picnic going to jail. This place that before the movement many would have avoided because it could mean the end of their lives, as death unfortunately was promised for many young Black youth as they went to these jail sites. However, they said, put me in jail eventually. That's not an issue of power. My freedom has nothing to do with putting me in jail. That was joy, that was courage. And they learned all of this on a pew. Their freedom no longer tied to what the state was doing or spaces of freedom, but remarkably, they felt comfortable because they were singing and not eating with people that they found to be their family now. And in that framework of becoming free in a jail cell, movement participants saw political possibilities and demonstrated agency through a cultural product, song. The movement participants often struggled, and when they would lean on each other, and the sound was powerful. They tell this story oftentimes. There's a story, if you've never heard of the Leesburg Stockade Girls. In Leesburg, Georgia, it was around the time of the March on Washington. There were 20 young girls who were arrested in Americus, Georgia, and then taken to the Leesburg Stockade. There's famous pictures taken by Danny Lyon of these several, you can look up this picture of these several girls as he peers through a cell as one of his other folks distracts the officer. And they're in the middle of the wilderness. And I always ask this question, why did they stay? Why did they go? And no one ever really went to see them. They only recently started telling their story about 50 or 60 years later. They received the Medal of Honor from President Obama. And in that time period, they talked about how for almost 30 days, they sat with each other in this small stockade, not really any much bigger than this room. There was no running water. There was no functioning places. And they said, when they were asked what they did, they said they sang. They sang in the wilderness. Their parents didn't know where they were. These were mostly middle schoolers and high schoolers. And many of them actually left town following this moment. However, they accounted as their greatest achievement to sit in this jail cell for almost a month during the March on Washington. And again, this idea of law and order was no longer a fear, but a gateway. And thus, it was a gateway to courage. Next, one of the main lessons I think you learn on the pew of the civil rights movement is communion. People learn to commune with one another. Charles Sherrod, again, as the field secretary of Albany, remembers the first meeting. He says, as they rose to sing "We Shall Overcome," that great anthem of the civil rights movement, people held arms together. And next to him, he saw the trash worker, the mailman, the doctor, people who would not have engaged with each other across class, standing, holding arms together, crying tears as they sang "If We Shall Overcome." And so in this question on who is a part of your path to freedom, it's everybody. My freedom is tied to yours as yours is tied to mine, and that has meaning. And because I believe in the human breath, and that movement talked a lot about human breath being important, that all of our freedoms are tied together. And so when we think about this pathway of freedom, who should we take with us and where are we headed? I'm reminded of the song, "I'm on my way to freedom land."
I'm on my way to freedom land.
And as we consider the many ways and the pathways to our own versions of what freedom is, I do believe that version also includes that we give mercy. And so mercy is important in the movement because it was not uncommon at a mass meeting on these pews to hear men and women testify about their fears. For one, is recorded, a man got up to the mic and he said, "I'm afraid. It could cost my job, it could cost me my life, but I want to be free. I want a better life for my children, so I'm going down to the courthouse. I'm going to trust God to take me there, and I'm going to trust God to bring me back." These sort of acts align with what particularly SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was all about in these meetings, allowing the people to teach and become leaders for themselves and think. This is how political consciousness is born. They encourage people to bring light to their boxes, right? This idea that a town was a box that they needed to light up, and how much they could commit to this fight to freedom, folks needed to decide for themselves. Empowering communities and seeing the changes in the people change rural Southern towns, and particularly the sound held that power together. In the movement, there was a transformation that took place inside of people, and the singing echoed it. If people are transformed, they create the sound that lets you know they are new people. It is a sound you've never heard before, and they never have heard it before with themselves because they've never been in that place before. Underlying this gathering on pews, these mass meetings, people had come up with a new framework for human relations. Essentially, these changes look like refusals in the face of humiliating racial moments, bodies no longer bent when walking down the streets, standing up in public spaces, existing with one's head held high. This idea of a new human emerged in this moment, built on this one thing that we all believe in, human dignity and respect. One difficult thing during mass meetings was how to capture this moment. How do you know what really happened there? And Albany reporters sat on the floor between the first pew and the altar. For reporters like the journalist Pat Waiters, an older man who came down from Atlanta, from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, as he entered the mass meeting, he said it was a different world. He didn't really understand what was happening to him. He found his role as a reporter complicated and transformed during his time in Albany. He found attempts at writing the movement, as he says, in conventional terms, doing his part, pushing it toward the conventional would actually destroy it. And so in that moment, he said he had to often give himself back to the struggle. And he states, "I am back struggling against the heat to listen to the speaker, trying to make notes, struggling against the lingering lethargic feeling of loss of self. I am back somewhere short of that mysterious unknown place. The song had been carrying me away, turned to where I had been before. I have never heard such music. Gave myself to the beauty and the meaning of the mass meetings, to the spirit of the movement." Often in his writing, he described his physical state in the meeting as in an ecstatic heat, and hearing the music of the meeting as mystical and reverent. He remembers that during the time he noticed the physical beauty of Black women and children, him being baptized in the music allowed him to see people singing. His relationship as an observer began to blur as the spirit of the movement also reached him. Reflecting, he found that the music of the mass meeting spoke to the hypocrisy of the culture he grew up in. He remembers following the civil rights movement, singing the Star-Spangled Banner, and he said he used to sing it with such fervor and emotion, and now not finding the same meaning in both what he heard and what he was singing in the present. He looked around oftentimes in the singing of such certain songs and remembered the grip of Southern conditioning that he had to undo to write about the movement. Mass meetings brought him to life. He came alive, imagined the music not as a counterpoint to his words, but a representative of the depth of analysis of the work he needed to do. And so this brings me back to the word mercy. I've been currently reading this book, Read Until You Understand, by Farah Jasmine Griffin. And she writes about the word mercy through several different authors, and something that really caught me yesterday while I was preparing for this. And this question of particularly Black life and Black literature, she's asking, where is mercy in this? And so she takes this book, Grace by Natasha Dion, and she says, in this book, Grace, she says, justice is getting what you deserve, and mercy is not getting the bad you deserve. Grace is getting a good thing, even when you don't deserve it. And so when we think about life, and particularly the type of world we want to be a part of, mercy has to be along with that imagination. And moving into sort of the last word that I would like to focus on is imagination. And so we will have Sweet Honey in the Rock, Ella's song, kind of animate that sonically for us.
We'll believe in freedom cannot rest. We'll believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We'll believe in freedom cannot rest. Hear me talking to you. We'll believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mother sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mother sons. You believe in freedom cannot rest. Sing it with me if you like it. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
The song coming out of the moment of the Freedom Summer of 1964, when the young 3 SNCC workers who were working the Freedom Summer were found killed, drugged through the river. Now, the story that they don't tell, and why it's called Ella's song, is the words, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes," is usually a quote that we often hear coming from Ella Baker, this lifelong activist, not just of the civil rights movement, but of really of the, up until her death, really, the entire part of the 20th century, as she taught many different groups. However, the thing that we don't always know is that in that pulling of the river, they found so many unidentified black bodies in Mississippi when they were pulling it. And so in that moment, she said, we cannot rest just here, because now we have more work to do. They didn't know who these young men were as they were pulling and searching for bodies. And so in taking these words, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, what can you imagine? I think it's the last thing that we really learn from the movement that lingers with us, this sense of possibility. Imagine again, I've set up a moment, if we were in this church and there's a mass meeting, there's probably police officers outside. They would be outside on megaphones yelling the tags of your cars. And then the next day they would be published in the front page of the local paper so that people would know like where you lived, who you worked for, because you were gathered here. Many folks that would try to come at night, and it would be possible that this church would be burned down hours later after a meeting, and people would have to build it back up again. So it's like, what were they working for? On one end, yes, this was a movement that was working for citizenship and full rights in the United States. As they were granting this idea of a civil rights, not only came for, yes, we want to sit and eat together. Yes, we want to be able to vote, but also we want to be able to prosper. We want full lives, right? So we want to be able to enjoy education. We want access to water. People wanted the ability to be a part and make decisions for themselves in the commons. And so here we end in something of this idea of like love and this, what singing shows us about the voices of democracy. So in my work, I make an argument for a musical democracy. A democracy that sings, a democracy that hums, a democracy that really holds tight, because it can include so many of us, right? And so when we think about what does justice look like in the moment, maybe right now it just begins with your hum in reaction to the present. And so I leave you with the moment that I think really speaks to this idea of unmeaning and this meaning that we can get from singing voices. And so it's recorded often at mass meetings. You would hear speakers and little talking in between. Even though it was hard to separate out what was not singing and what was just the speaker, every now and again you could hear the words well and amen. Well as quietly in affirmation, well as crackling out in strong affirmation, well as urging the speaker to continue to tell more, helping him build interest. Well in sorrow over something cruel or outrageously told, well in joy, well in righteous anger, well most often in affirmation. Well as an invitation into the communion of faith, and amen, it is so as the confirmation. The tone in which these words are expressed give rise to the affect behind them, a possibility packed into one syllable. Well, an indicator of love and justice being embraced and confirmed with amen. Sitting on the pews of these mass meetings demonstrated to the movement was always for the people to emerge unafraid and continue living their quotidian lives with pride. The mass meeting was about becoming. The pew was about becoming. Emphasizing becoming indicates approaching a vision of a politics of possibility that focuses on the process, the moments between the action. Well as an understanding of the community is looking forward, attending the mass meetings as beyond planning for the next thing would place us back on the pew in the spirit of the everyday people moving faithfully to overcoming fear and tapping into their political imaginations. Thank you.
We're going to have a Q&A session. I'd like to begin, actually, if
Yeah.
I may. Do you teach classes on sound and music, and what does that look like?
Oh, yes. So I teach a class on my research called Black Southern Organizing and Sound. And what it looks like, we listen. There's some classes where I play entire recordings of mass meetings. I guess in an assignment way, what that looks like, I get the students to keep a sound journal. And so weekly we go through a sound journal just to get them to become better listeners of their world. And it's actually really beautiful to see how they grow, because in the beginning, let's say somebody will be like, I heard a bird, right? But then maybe a month or two later, it'll be like the light chirping, right? They get really into the details over time. They also do a soundscape project where they choose a place significant to them, either in Winston-Salem or on the campus of Wake Forest, and they give me why it's politically significant to them. And they go through and record over a week at different times of the day in different recordings, what they hear first with their ears, but then they also have a sound recording either on their phone, and then what that sound recording picks up. And what are human-made sounds? What is coming from the environment? What is coming from the man-made sound of the HVAC, right? And so all of these things are happening, and we literally just go through both popular albums, freedom singing. I have a lot of sound from the archive that I share with the students. And so we do that for the whole semester. We basically only make it to 1980 if I push it that far. But yeah, we could stick in the 60s the whole semester, yeah.
Sit in that class.
Thank you so very much. This has caused me to broaden myself immensely. One of the things that I would like for you to give us some thought about, one of the things that I am extremely concerned about for the black and white church is the insidious infusion into both congregations of white Christian nationalism. And I was just wondering, is there any synergy that you see between what you've talked about and what you experience with sound? And I love the music. I could march all the time with that. But how do you see us with what you know countering what's going on in both black and white churches? And it's the fastest growing racial authoritarian movement in Christendom now.
Yeah, that's a really great question. The way that I think about it first is when something grows, what is the underlying part of it? And so oftentimes it points back to lack of needs being met, right? And so what is the thing that people are attaching to this sort of nationalism movement within the church, right? And so we get back to dignity, we get back to being dignified in public life, people not feeling seen. And so this sort of taking of authority and power to then attach it to God, of course, we know has justified many movements of really harm and violence across the era, and not just in the United States, but in other spaces as well. And what we have is that growing. And so I can speak particularly to my dad is also a pastor of an AME church in Lithonia, Georgia. And so I know for what's big right now is really engaging young folks, right? As the internet and the quickness of it, they're bringing these ideas into the church. And here we have now more so patriarchal thought around how the governance of space should work. But then it's also about this idea for him, he's struggling with how do you pull in young Black boys back into seeing the community. And I think that's something that has been like destroyed both not only in this thought, but as people have had to figure out how to survive, we've become more individual. And so when we talk about something like the movement, there's an understanding that we are attached together, right? There's a concept in Black political thought called linked fate. And again, linked fate. Okay, and so in this thought though, it's made to think Michael Dawson, he's a scholar, he just retired from the University of Chicago. And in that thought, when he created it in '94, he talks about the idea that Black people for so long had to understand that their actual fates were linked together. As we get further away from the civil rights movement and into the 21st century, folks take more of an individualistic approach. And so that same thing, I think, is what makes it attractive to this Christian white nationalism, actually, is because it gives this sort of self-authority for people to go and push onto other folks, right? And so the way to teach it is having moments like this. I do think for me, my whole thing right now is like, we gotta go to where people wanna be and gotta go sit with them and hear maybe things that might make you uncomfortable and sit and try to show love and care, because between the pandemic and then especially if you start getting into like Gen Z folks, I'm like right on the edge of the end of millennial, but even like Gen Z, I'm like, I don't know what's happening here, but listening to them and figuring out what it is, why is this an attractive thing in the form of leadership? People are reaching out for connection in ways that are almost unhealthy, right? And so that is an attractive thing to it. And so the question is like, how do we get two rooms that looked like the civil rights movement again? Where is that urgency to recreate these spaces? And just doing that work of sitting with each other, I think is the first step, right? Because it's kind of like, we don't have many intergenerational spaces anymore. People take their own thoughts and we divide that into like, this is my opinion, and some things are not just opinions, right? But some things can be dangerous, and so pointing that out and willing to be uncomfortable, right? Because if you stick to social media, you get back whatever you put out, right? But you can change an algorithm. Algorithm's gonna serve you. However, another person, like talking to my 95-year-old grandmother, is not. Right? She's going to tell me her thoughts in real truth and reality. And I think some of that spaces is missing also in church life, as one, coming out of the pandemic, but then two, just like really centering on like what community looks like. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hello, Dr. Crawford. It's so wonderful to be here and hear your presentation. It was really interesting. Thank you so much. Is that better? You know, when you speak of meetings, I don't know if you're speaking of a regular church service or meetings for a particular cause,
Yeah.
you know, outside of the normal church service meetings. I grew up in the South. I have family in Albany, Georgia. We've had a couple of family reunions there. So I'm sort of a really Southern hometown girl. I don't think, you know, I go to church. I was young, very young then. And as I reflect on that, I go to church and I can hear the sounds of the music in those church services, not really attaching any meaning to it, other than the song that was being played at the moment. But I just have to thank you for your perspective that you brought on what was really coming from those pews. it's just so touching for me. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
So, talk about sound and the meaning of the words. Because classes
Yeah.
was mentioning the sound and the words. You have to comment on that?
Yeah, definitely. So both, I was talking about both the church service, but then the meetings that would often happen like outside of the church service, which are the mass meetings. And in Albany, they tend to happen weekly. So I think they happen like on different churches. It would be across the region. But like Shiloh Baptist Church was a huge church that hosted a lot of it. The actual like Albany Civil Rights Museum is attached to the original Shiloh Baptist Church now that you can go visit, and that's where King spoke. But when we start thinking about the meaning of the words, oftentimes with freedom songs, they took hymns that people knew and they changed the words subtly, right? So like in the case of what I said, like over my head, I see freedom in the air, the original song is trouble. But then if we think about even the most popular freedom song, which is We Shall Overcome, of course, that is also a hymn that is slowly changed, and even like the rhythm of the song is changed over time. It originally becomes, I guess, not a freedom song, but a song in movement in, I want to say it's South Carolina women's workers strike, like in the 30s, essentially. They change it from like, I shall overcome someday, which is the hymn, into We Shall Overcome. And again, the lyrics start to like subtly change as it goes to different places, right? So if you were to go to Birmingham, they sing We Shall Overcome different than people in Atlanta. And the same if you were to be in Chicago, like every place had like their own different like change on these words in the song. Every now and again, you would get like original songs written. So one written in Albany that was for that purpose was Oh Pritchett, Oh Kelly, right? And so that particularly called out the mayor and the chief of police. But more than that, you would just get songs straight sung the way that they were written as hymns, right? So Fannie Lou Hamer's famous song was This Little Light of Mine. And she would sing that often because that would be an empowering song for people to really remind themselves that we should be fearless in this moment. And so really taking that song as it is and just holding on to it.
You know, and speaking of changing the songs, sometimes I'll go to a church now, and I'll hear a song, and I may not necessarily recognize, but when I listen to the words, I'll say, oh, that's that song.
Yeah.
And it's the song that we sang in our little church in our hometown when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I think now I'm becoming more appreciative of the same song, but different.
Yeah.
And it's not really the same song. It's the same words, but a different meaning.
Right.
So I think I have to sort of broaden my horizon on why these things happen and just be appreciative that the meaning is still there and it means the same as it meant to me, it means the same to someone else.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so got some questions back there too.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford, for your words today. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks we could listen to you all day. But I am curious if you could maybe share with us a little bit about your personal sound practice. How do you listen? What are you listening to lately? And maybe you could share with us some ideas for how we can hear better and maybe ways that we can speak differently so people can hear us better as well.
This is also my partner, so she's she is taking a liberty right now. But great question, Hallie. So when thinking about particularly my sound practice, I don't know, I would say I get very still. Like I'm very much, it really goes, the house goes in between complete quietness and me playing like 12 different things at the same time. And so oftentimes, the other thing that I'm practicing doing, so I'm actually on research leave this school year, working on my book, and really thinking about like, I don't sing, surprisingly, and so I've become a great listener to things, and for me it begins with with quiet, which isn't silence, right, in its own way, but that stillness act of showing that power. Really just like, and I listen to people differently now since I've started doing this work and really thinking about their voice and what they're trying to portray to me, like looking people in the eye, looking at folks' lips, like what are they trying to get out, right? Thinking about like Southern tones, right? And all these different ways and creative ways that we speak that are so beautiful and necessary to live on, also as well as we talk about like the Southern accent dying as well. And so, it begins with just like, I listen first for meaning, and I give people goodwill first. I don't listen to speak. I don't listen to respond. Oftentimes, I ask for it. A great point that I take from you is Hallie often says, say more, right? And I put that into my class. Like even when I think a student just says something crazy to me, I'm like, no, but I don't do that anymore. I say more, to really try to get to that well-meaning point of what we're trying to do. I don't approach anybody as an enemy. I think listening is sometimes our least used political value, right? And if we listen more, we can get places more, because we are people. And so really putting that into practice. And so sometimes when, particularly I think, take the hardest moment you can think of when you have to listen. Okay, and then when you think about that moment, ask yourself, how long did I wait to respond? Right? Like, did I let that person really speak? Right? Did I cut them off? Was I looking for a particular response when I stopped listening? Right? Like, did I disengage them because maybe this is not what I want to hear? Really, like, listening and sitting still can make you very uncomfortable, especially if you're hearing things you don't really want to hear. And so putting that into practice as an act, and maybe being in a classroom has helped a lot with that, because I just never know what a student is going to say to me. But just like literally being still, letting folks speak, valuing someone's voice, because if we don't listen to each other, who will? And like it is in that interaction, I think that's the first political interaction, that I listen to a counterpart, even if we don't agree, that I care enough to see their humanity first. I'm not saying you gotta let them go off too long, but like, did I listen first as a core principle? Yeah.
Could you say more?
Could I say more? Yeah.
Growing up in the 1960s and 70s in the Midwest, they talked about the spirituals and all being songs from the fields as a way of communicating amongst groups and coordinating activities. And is that true?
Yeah, that is very true, right? So when we start to think about the traveling and particularly Black American sound, it does begin with slavery, right? And particularly people will say like, we have to decide where Black identity is created. Is it created right as folks leave the shores of West Africa and they load these boats on the ship, in the ship with people with multiple languages happening on the bottom of the ship? How do you learn to communicate? And so is this where first we get like a good documentary is The Language Ukrainian, I want to say it's called. And essentially they're speaking of like Black sound being created in the bottom of the ship, as people had to figure out how to communicate. And so we get into this idea that like Black Americans speak in broken English, but of course that has a longer history of multiple languages being translated into one, right? And sounds being translated into one, but then also not being told to learn English. And so when we think about what's happening on a plantation field, they take some of what they're also learning Christian songs, right? They're going to these churches. There is a different editions of what is be considered an enslaved Bible that is created in the particularly, I want to say, the 1800s, early 1800s that folks were engaging with. And so they're taking these moments, they're taking these songs both from West Africa and Christianity in the United States and making them one. And of course, one of the famous ones is like Go Up Moses, and that was supposed to be the call for when if Harriet Tubman was in the area or people were leaving shortly to go north, you knew that that meant that you needed to be wherever the location was to flee, right? And then we have like Follow the Drinking Gourd, which of course was another song. And then of course we have these songs of ailment. If you notice, a lot of those songs are sung in a minor key, which are often attributed to Black American sound. Because of the sorrowness of the voice and the situations. But however, there were these like moments away from the plantation that I really find important too. They were called hush harbors. And so there's a lot of more writing about this now. And essentially what would happen, Maya Angelou writes about this because she had the pot of her great grandmother in her house. They would take this pot into the field and essentially have a church meeting. But under the pot, so they wouldn't be too loud at night, they would whisper prayers of freedom, prayers to escape, prayers for the safety of their family, and they would dance around this pot in darkness. And under hushed tones, they would whisper into this pot and put it back down on the ground as promises of something more. So those songs are definitely a huge part in the blending. So this like mixing of songs and this meaning over time reaches a long way, yeah.
This may be a little off topic, but I understand the rise of Nazism was a result of the oppression in 1930s Germany and how we had maybe been unfair in the treaty. I see the same thing now with a bunch of privileged people.
Yeah.
Is that too far off topic? I'm sorry.
I mean, we always say history repeats itself, so you must know it, which is why education is important. So paying attention to the signs. My first, as David said, I went to school to study conflict resolution. And my favorite thing that I was focusing on until some kind of way I got into sound was transitional justice. And so transitional justice as an international concept is the movement from democracy or non-democracy to a democratic government. It often comes out of World War II, which is like the first time we put these principles into work. However, in the United States, the reflection would be if you think about Reconstruction, right? So we have like a strong almost 2 decades between 1865 and 1885 of what would have been America's Reconstruction. Some call it the second founding, right? As we come to this end of the Civil War, and how do you bring a country back together into a democratic moment, right? And so I think if you want to start with something to like study on present day America historically, you can kind of see some of the same sort of decisions that were being made there reflect, unfortunately, almost 2 decades later. Of course, we're also about to celebrate 250 years of American democracy. And like, what does that mean in like a long run scale to celebrate 250 years?
Other questions?
Yeah, I think
Not really a question, but I would like, one of the things that you have made me really think about, and then that young lady back there had me really thinking about it, is how we bring to different songs the memories and experiences that we have had and how those change. Because I distinctly remember when I first started marching and singing that freedom song and how it has changed in my mind as to what it really, really means and demands of us. And I think one of the things you've certainly brought to me today is that I'm going to start really rethinking about some of this. We've got in our church a gospel songbook, and I just love them because they're my kind of music, but they're going to bring a different thought pattern to me based on today. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to you and to Wake Forest Christian Church for having this talk. I've heard so much from you that has caused me to expand my awareness, but there's so much that
I'm not going to remember and take back with me, and I want to. Is there any way that we can read what you gave to us, or how would I go back over this?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, did you record it? Okay, so I highly recorded all of this. I'll send this to David, but I'll also post it on my website, I guess, so, right? Yeah, I'll post it on my website. If you Google me, I will list it. It's cbcrawford.com. I'm also working on my first book, but it probably won't be out for another year and a half. But it's basically on what I described. It's called Hum So the Devil Doesn't Hear You, Black Rural Southern Existences as the Otherwise, where I basically focus on humming, moaning, shouting as these moments of showing collectivity and power and what that teaches us about American democracy. So, but I will definitely post it and make sure David gets a copy of this as well.
You can answer this later if you want to and not public. The AV team is recording this session.
Okay, yeah.
And so if we have your permission, we can distribute those that would.
Yeah, you can definitely distribute it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now I'm here for knowledge for all. Like, we all must do our part, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have been to a friend's grandmother's fourth cousin uncle's service, and I did not know the person, and I find myself welling up in tears and in grieving. Our country has had two great grievous encounters, experiences that we have not grieved: the Native American Indians and the Black culture. Is music one of the ways we can grieve? Is that an appropriate way to grieve?
Music?
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the greatest ways to grieve. Actually, is it okay if I play like one more song here? So one of the things that I started off with was actually the song We'll Never Turn Back, and it was actually written as a song of grief that they would sing when folks died in the movement and in the moment. So play a little bit of this. But I think sound brings us all together in that way that you kind of get through, and I do think the sound without words really does it. But what you'll hear is a recording of Rutha Mae Harris, an original SNCC freedom singer from Albany, Georgia, and her brother Emery. Let's see.
We've been beautified. We've been scorned. We've been talked about. Sure you were born, but we'll never turn back. No, we'll never turn back until we've all been freed, and we'll have equality.
And I think when we think about music and grief, there's like 4 main categories of freedom songs. If you were to pick up like a freedom song book and source book, they always break it down like this. There's these songs of remembrance, right? But one thing about remembrance that I think comes out of particularly like the Black liberation tradition is that someone's death is not the end, it's the beginning for something else new, right? And so how do we grieve but then still create life in the ways that they would have imagined? And how do we hold that as like an inspiration to go forward? Like, grief should be held and taken seriously, but then it is also a motivator across particularly the civil rights movement, because the number of lives lost became so high at some point that they were singing these songs and then the next day going to march, and then somebody else is gone again and they're singing these songs, and it's like this cycle of death. And so there's a performance that you can find online that Bernice Johnson Reagan does where she calls it action or death, and it's like called the action logic. And she asks the question, really it's in the liner notes, she says, what are you willing to die for, right? And so like, don't do anything you're not willing to die for, literally. And so taking that as like a moment, I do think the sound brings us together, but it should also uplift us to like continue on that track. And so We'll Never Turn Back is one of those songs for me that reminds me even like why I do what I do 60 plus years later, right? Like my parents were just being born at the start of the Albany movement. Like my granny told me the story, like, oh yeah, they were in jail, but I was raising kids, right? And so she was like, I couldn't march because I had to make sure that my young kids were home and taken care of. But thinking about like how life coexists with death so intimately, and how political that is in that sense of like that intimacy of like what happens that brings it together. And on one end we say life is freedom, and on the other end we say death is freedom. And so it's like, what do I do with my breath in that case? Yeah.
Thank you for your message today. One comment you made that stuck with me pretty good was your freedom and my freedom, we depend on each other.
Yeah.
And that carries over into life experiences.
Yeah.
As a young recruit in a fully integrated platoon in the Army, the Black Master Sergeant said, men, look at the man in front of you, look at the man behind you, look at the man on your left and your right. Someday, you may depend on that man for your life and he for his.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Yes, I think that's the thing I say everywhere I go now, right? Like, just a reminder, our freedoms are linked together, like literally linked together. Every decision you make impacts someone's life, and so really holding on to that. So thank you. Yeah.
What's going on? You had mentioned community.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering about the question of like, what do you envision moving forward? What community looks like, as well how sound. You kind of touched on it just then. How sound can facilitate that.
Yeah.
But also how to facilitate that in other ways moving forward. Not even like what's happened, but what we can do.
No, that's a great question. Yeah, in the present day, thinking about like where and how community should happen. One, I've taken to knowing all the neighbors on our street. That's one way of knowing. Like, I'm like, if you don't, I mean, it's so, I feel like growing up, I knew all the people that lived on my street, but I've lived so many different places now that it's just like, okay, let's start simple. Like, who's the closest to me that I don't know, right? I make it important to know people's names. I feel like that's the first like real human thing we can do. And like, for the most part, I go wherever I'm asked to talk. Like, we've been to some strange places in Winston where it's just like, why am I here? But that reaching out and like being willing to sit in that discomfort. I think for the first part, there's a lot of this return to gathering. I'm also a part of this group called Citizen University. You can look it up online, and they really host these, they kind of encourage people to have what they call civic Saturdays, right? And these can go from any size to something like this to something at your house. And they're giving micro grants right now, like $100 for you to host a dinner, right? And so literally start with people you know that you want to eat with first, right? Like, it doesn't have to be something controversial, but like really like asking people, how are you doing for real, right? Because we can get by with like, I'm good, or like all is well, right? Like, I'm blessed, but really, how are you doing? And I think some of those ways, really the most simple ways of building community that makes sense for you, like I tell my cousins who play like video games, like, stop cursing out your teammates on 2K, right? Like, let's ask him how he's doing first before we get into the game. So like meeting people where they're at in terms of like what your community looks like. And so a lot of folks are encouraging in the civic engagement world, literally just like hosting something. Host something, invite people over, show people that you care about their lives at the most simple level, and then build from there with other people, right? And you can get into like everything doesn't have to be a big moment to make the impact, right? Peace through understanding was one of the mottos of this group, People to People, that I did like in high school. And it really oftentimes, the first time I went to China with them, and we were like in this older woman's house in Beijing, and she offered us food, and then she talked to us through pointing through a sheet on a paper, right? But that conversation is still something I remember almost like 15 years later, because literally just trying to engage with someone in that really intimate way is important. So starting simple, like knowing people, protecting, find out what people need, building resources. I think turning internalized to community that you care about important. Like, do I know what my brother needs to stay safe? Like, do I know what my family needs to live right now is important. And those are some of the cooperative practices that actually maintain the movement, right? Like, after they marched, they had to go somewhere. Somebody was cooking, somebody prepared beds. And so really knowing that, like, we don't need everybody in the streets. We say social justice is an ecosystem, right? Somebody's gonna tell the story, somebody's gonna be out in the streets with a microphone, somebody's just gonna stand silent, somebody's gonna be at home, right? Like, there's different ways. Somebody's the doctor that's taking care, someone's the lawyer. They had this ecosystem. And so really like slowly establishing your own ecosystem of care. Yeah.
A couple more questions. Okay.
Yeah, I think we had one more. Yeah.
I just want to thank you for the talk today. It just reinforced so much of what has been on my mind, and you know, there's a thing where the Lord says, the Bible says that He. I've been thinking about the song actually, where it says, "I love the Lord; He heard my cry, and pitied every groan."
Yeah. Pitied
every groan. And that groan is a sound.
It is, yeah.
And I just loved what you said, because it was like I was drawn to this talk today for some reason. And what you said to me and the music that you played affirms so much that song, that hymn that has been giving me comfort, that, you know, I hasten to the throne of the Lord when my heart is heavy. And right now there's so many heavy things going on. And all I can do is groan sometimes.
Yeah.
And that song that comes across so many generations has comforted me to today. So I really, really treasure what you've had to say, and I thank you so much for saying it.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
The organization doing the mini grants?
Citizen University. Yeah. Yeah.
Our church has asked Reverend Larry Wilder, who is at Olive Branch Baptist Church, to lead a discussion for our church and his church and others on the book by Dr. Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited. And that's the book that Dr. Martin Luther King took with him almost on every single march. And so we're going to be having that at their church, actually, Olive Branch, in February, so we invite you to do that. Sometimes my fingers don't work real well. On the flyer that we handed out to you, it's October the 19th and not the 29th. It's Sunday the 19th and not the 29th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are graced and blessed by you being here. And thank you for speaking to us in our weird place also. Thank you. We will post this on our website, and so you can go wakeforestchristianchurch.org, and I'm not sure it'll be today, but in the coming week it'll be on our website. Okay? Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
My sister here was wondering brilliantly if we could close with a song of your choosing.
A song of my choosing.
We shall overcome.
Oh yeah, we could sing. Do we want to sing We Shall Overcome together? I don't know if I have a recording of this. Hold on. Let's see. Let's see what we got here real quick. Yeah, we could do We Shall Overcome. And so in the tradition of the movement, if you don't mind standing, and if you're okay with being touched, let people know or not, right? And so you would make a circle, right? And we would cross arms in this circle because the idea is that the chain has to be broken. So right over left. Yeah. If you don't mind. Right over left in the crossing of your arms. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna let you all hold hands so I can play the song. Let's see. Hold on. Let's see, I'm sorry. Give me a second here to pull the song up. All right. And if you don't know who you're standing next to, introduce yourself, right? Because this is how community starts. All right. Okay, hold on a second here. I'm sorry. Pull this up. All right, we will listen to Pete Seeger's version of We Shall Overcome. Let's see. And so if you don't want to sing, hum to it. It gets us where we gotta go. All right, let's see.
You know, there's lots of people who get discouraged about this damned human race. But every time I think about it, I think of, remember Shakespeare said, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
I'm sorry, skip that.